Welcome to another episode of Chris McDaniel's America here on the Midnight Ride Network. I'm Chris McDaniel. With me, as always, Jack Fairchilds. Jack,
hey, Chris.
Hope you're doing well. I got to tell you, before we even start this show today, I feel like this is all downhill from this moment. First of all, I'm exhausted. I've been traveling just a bit, and the law practice is taking its toll on me. So anything potentially could happen today. In fact, we've said before that we're really prone to say outrageous things. This is especially true when we're exhausted. So get ready for a series of outrageous things. And don't bring that thing out just yet. We'll get to the mask in a second. Before we get started, I want to go over just a couple of things because we're talking about outrageous things. And these subjects that we're going to cover today lead to a bit of hyperbole. It really will. It's going to lead to some anger. And I get that going into it. But I want to touch on a few things, particularly since this last week has been a week of a lot of unusual news. Mm-hmm. The abortion issue. Again, it's back, not only impacting the judiciary, but now impacting elections all across the country. I want to talk about that, and I want to talk about how Republicans now seem to be running from that issue. Also, you can't have an episode without talking a bit about Israel and its present conflict with Iran, so we'll touch on that. News today about NPR. I'm not sure if you saw that, but NPR actually fired one of its editors because he dared to speak the truth about NPR.
I did see that.
He says something we've always known, which is NPR is a very leftist organization and has been for years. He says it out loud, and instead of confronting him, instead of debating him, well, they just let the guy go. So we'll talk about that.
They officially fired him.
Well, listen, it started out, I've seen two reports. If you ask NPR, he's suspended. If you ask another couple of agencies, he's been terminated. Public relations there, I'm sure. I want to talk also about the rhinos out there. Even if we don't get into the rhino hour, the Chris McDaniel rhino hunter thing this time, I want to talk about the rhinos and how they led to the rise of Donald Trump and how they're still impacting his significance in the party. And I also want to cover the non-rhino of the day, that is the Republican of today, and that's Chip Roy out of Texas. We'll get to him. But first, before we get to those news items, and remember, I'm tired. Give me a break. I don't want the nasty emails. If I say something ridiculous, just work with me here today, okay? One of the things I've been concerned about is human nature. And I know you think, well, why is that an issue, human nature? Human nature seems to be running directly into our conservative philosophy, and in many instances, it's winning the day. I say that because our founders created a system that confronted human nature, understood it, the imperfections of individuals, and how individuals typically want to draw power unto themselves. And the founders recognized that. They had seen the monarchs of the time. They had read history. They understood the Scottish philosophers talking about liberty and what it meant to be free. And wrapped up in that was a system they designed that was supposed to confront and perhaps even defeat, in some respects, human nature. So what's that system? It started with the separation of powers. Separation of powers. You have an executive branch, a judicial branch, and a legislative branch. And the theory is that these branches, with their own ambition and their own avarice and their own need to control and take and usurp power, would fight the other branches. And somehow government would remain limited, making sure that human nature would not prevail. And what is the ultimate human nature when it comes to politics? It's the acquisition of power. It's the acquisition of control. So how do you build a system to make sure no one man or no one party, or no one institution can gain too much control where it threatens liberty? So they created this system. They gave us what's called the horizontal division of powers, that's between the branches, but also a vertical separation of powers between the states and the federal government.
Yes.
And they recognized that human nature ultimately could be the problem. Well, in the last 30 or 40 or 50 years, we've seen, and there are 1,000 reasons for it. Maybe it's social media, maybe it's the news cycles, maybe it's just our common anger about every issue. Human nature appears to be prevalent. It's breaking down the institutions. It's breaking down the institutions, and once again, we see on both sides of the equation this rise in authoritarianism. Mm-hmm. And I say that because I'm looking today, just trying to understand human nature, and I see a post I've made. And the post is pretty simple. It's about Israel. And basically, it's a meme that's praying for Israel. Seems pretty non-controversial.
Makes sense. I mean, I think you should pray for people like Israel.
I think so. Considering their present predicament and the fact that they're surrounded and the fact that they're outnumbered. I think that they deserve our prayers at this stage. And underneath it, there was this really unusual comment. Not a comment, a reaction. Mm-hmm. Have you noticed the passive aggression social media people? They won't say anything. They'll just laugh.
Yeah, the laugh emoji. That is the most cowardly thing that you can do on social media.
Yeah, the laugh emoji. It's a way of saying, just kind of mocking the comment, which is fine. They have every right to mock the comment, but I wish they would actually engage in conversation. So here it is. I see the laugh. Well, it's crazy because you're talking about prayer, and you're talking about praying for a country that has recently been under attack. So why would somebody laugh at that? So, of course, I do what everybody does. I go to stalk their page, right? Isn't that what everybody likes to do, is to go stalk
Unfortunately, yes, I've done that myself as well.
It just has to happen. You're like, who is this lunatic that's laughing about the destruction of Israel? So you click on it, bam. And sure enough, it appears to be a conservative-leaning page. And I'm like, whoa, what is this? And you start drilling down, and it's really authoritarian. It's really fascist light, if you will. And I hate to use that term because the liberals have bastardized it over the years. I'm not sure anybody knows what that means anymore. We'll talk about that in a second. But I'm seeing all these I won't say Jewish, but Israeli, you could argue it's one and the same, comments on this page. And I'm blown away by it. And it made me start thinking about human nature, why it is that humans behave the way they do, and why that fear drives so much of the conversation. It appears that you try to protect individual liberty at all costs, but fear has a way of watering down these institutions, and both sides have been very guilty, especially the Democrats, of trying to bring fear into every debate. And so now we find ourselves fighting for the institutions, fighting for our traditions, trying to figure out what's going to survive this ever-present change. Human nature seems to be prevailing. So ask yourself this: if it's prevailing against conservative institutions, and I don't mean to define the institutions, the separation of powers as notoriously politically conservative, but certainly from the standpoint of the protection of individual liberties. If it's breaking those things down, maybe conservatism itself isn't well suited for the fight. Maybe there's something about our mindset that's causing us to lose. And people say, well, that couldn't be the case. Well, think about it. We're raised in an environment normally to be passive.
Yeah.
We're raised in an environment to be compliant.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir. No, sir. We're raised into compliance to listen to our elders and to respect those positions, right?
Yes.
You think about the most conservative folks you know, and these are pretty buttoned up people. These are good folks, right?
Absolutely.
They don't like to fight. Think about it. They don't like to fight. They would rather go along to get along. They've learned early in life to try to avoid controversy and to just be nice boys and girls. Share your toys.
Yeah.
Be kind. Say please. Nothing wrong with those things. Manners matter, and those traditions matter. But is it ill-suited for the present fight before us because the American left doesn't seem to share those same proclivities? They're a bit more, and I don't mean this necessarily in a bad way, because if you come to a fight, you're supposed to try to win it, right?
I think so, yes.
Well, those girls and guys have come to the fight to win.
And they're winning quite frequently.
Oh, well, they can be a bit vicious. They can be a bit vindictive. And I'm starting to see those elements now also on the right. Don't get me wrong. You see it both sides. But it seems to me the first real nasty punches almost always come from the left side of the equation. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to wrap this up eventually toward the end of the show and explain why it is that Trump rose in power under these circumstances and why it was human nature that may have put him there in the first place. But think about it. Human nature, conservatism, we're kind, we're soft, we let things happen, we accept change without stopping it. It seems now that our own nice or acceptable mannerisms are getting in the way of us stopping this force that's before us, and that force is perpetual change pushed by liberalism. So what occurs? We sense change, we fear the change, and then the authoritarian impulses begin to rise because we fear and we want to use the power of government to keep things as they once were. Mm-hmm. But that is antithetical to early conservative thought. We're not supposed to fear, first of all. But secondly, if we do, our job's to convince, not to use the force of government to dictate.
Bingo.
That's the distinction here. And I think that's what a lot of people are missing. And look, I get it. We're all worried about the future.
Yeah.
I've got 2 kids. I want to see them inherit a country similar to the one I inherited, where they have upward mobility and a chance to achieve something without being ostracized for who they are. And fear is a natural result of seeing things slip away. But I have a couple of options here. As a conservative, I can be consistent to my positions, or I can start dictating to people about how they live their lives. That doesn't seem to be a very conservative thing. Now, human nature. Whenever we sense fear, we change our mindsets. Maybe liberty becomes not so important to us. Maybe the Constitution doesn't become important to us or as much as it should. So force becomes the name of the game, it seems, for both sides. Now we're getting somewhere. Force. Wait, well, hold on one second.
Okay.
Force. Force is the name of the game for both sides. Now, this is the part of the show I think is going to leave a lot of people's heads scratching and shaking and in convulsions when I'm done. If you think about political systems, where conservatism is a system that values the individual above all.
Yeah.
It doesn't place the nation above the individual necessarily. It doesn't place the collective above individuals or the government above individuals. It seeks to secure, in its proper role, individual rights from encroachment, right? We're trying to conserve a space where politicians can't control us, conserve a space where we can make our own decisions, whether they're good or bad, and live with the consequences of those decisions. So we have this space we're trying to conserve. If you look at it from that perspective, there's a lot more in common with fascism, socialism, and communism than meets the eye. People say, well, how could that be? These ideologies appear contrary. In fact, if you think about the old Russian Revolution and how they saw the Nazis, they were very much at war all the time. Mm-hmm. But these people had certain core convictions they shared. Have you ever considered that? Think about it. In each of those regimes, whether it was Hitler or Stalin, or even take a less rigid regime and call it socialism, in each of those forms of government, the individual is always subverted. The individual always comes second to some other cause. So if you look at conservatism the way it's supposed to be, we're supposed to elevate the individual.
Yes.
All three other of those systems place the individual under the collective, whether it's fascism and it's placed under the nation, whether it's socialism placed under the collective, or under communism placed under the firm control of government. Somewhere along the way, in all of those systems, the individual loses. That's a problem. So I don't know if I like this present political debate. The debate seems to be they call all conservatives fascist. I don't like fascist either.
No.
You know why I don't? Because they place the nation and they place the government over individuals.
Yes.
It's wrong. It's a sin against mankind.
Yes.
But so's communism.
Yes.
They're two sides of the same coin. If you think about it, ultimately the individual pays the ultimate price. And no matter where it's been tried, whether it's Pol Pot in Cambodia, whether it's North Korea, whether it's Stalin, or whether it's Hitler, the result is always the same. Mm-hmm. They're going to use propaganda, they're going to use force, they're going to use control to subjugate a population.
Yeah.
The only difference is their outcomes. Nationalists push one agenda, the communists push another, and they find that objectionable. But the sin of both philosophies is that they don't value individuals.
And I think that's where this whole fascism argument, when the left tries to throw out that insult to conservatives, it's never gained muster with me, but I understand why they do it. But at the same time, you have to look within yourself, within people in your own movement, and that liberals, I'm talking to you as well. This is not just something I'm saying in a conversation with Chris here. I'm talking to them as well, because fascism, I don't think, is exclusive to either ideology. I think when you look at liberals and you see, I think anyone that views the force of government over the individual can fall under that fascism label.
Well, before you consider all of this nonsense, and I know there are distinctions to be made, but the distinctions are almost always in the outcome.
Yes.
As opposed to what's occurring philosophically to the individual. So I made some notes today just thinking through this. If I thought about the handful of things that these ideologies have in common, the first is centralized control. Mm-hmm. Think about it, centralized control. There's always an argument that you have to centralize economically and socially, and there has to be some degree of control over the population. That's the first thing they all three have in common. Number two, a planned economy. Mm-hmm. Planned economy. Even fascists during Hitler's regime had a planned economy specifically during wartime. They had capitalist tendencies, but they also had a lot of anti-capitalist tendencies. And that's the other thing, the collectivist orientation of these three philosophies. Collectivism over the individual, but the anti-capitalist rhetoric. All three attack capitalism, just different in the outcomes of how they attacked it. You might recall, if you think about the communists, they want the means of production. There's this class warfare. They've got to control the means. They attack capitalism as evil. Socialists share that mindset. The Nazis took it a different direction. They attacked it as well as part of this grand Jewish conspiracy. It's all absurd. Because lost somewhere in all of that is just the regular individual trying to prosper in society. And governments, if anything, should be built around that concept where at least people have a chance to achieve some degree of success. And all three of those regimes and all three of those philosophies, ultimately, there's going to be failure, there's going to be burdens, there's going to be a collapse eventually of society. And God willing, there'll be a revolution where people actually begin to take back what these governments have taken from them. So I want you to think through that. Each of those is a fault of human condition, a fault of human nature, if you will, because fear leads them to think in authoritarian terms.
Yes, I agree 100%.
That's the point I've been trying to make. Maybe we're fighting a battle against our own minds.
Well, Chris, there are great people out there, people that I have a lot of respect for and agree with on multiple issues. But sometimes I see them going to Jackson or going to Washington, wherever, state capitol, U.S. Capitol, doesn't matter, but they're going up there, and in their mind, it's good and it probably is good intentions, but they're trying to utilize the force of government to put their will out there. And I recoil from that because I see them start to do that, and I say, while I'm with you on this issue, that's not a place that I want government touching, because what happens when the people that you like aren't in power, and then they take advantage of what you helped put in place in the first place? And they never ask that question.
But that's the point of the human condition. And that's what human nature seems to be so problematic, because when we have a power, we want to take it and exert it and to control the other side. And when they have the power, they want to do the same thing. But that results in centralization of power.
It does.
That results in the same sins of socialism, communism, fascism. It's a centralization of authority is what we're seeing, and that's the problem. We should take it a different step. Decentralize the authority, bring the powers back to the states as local as possible, and let these states operate as experiments.
Like the founders intended.
Like the founders intended. At least we wouldn't be so mad at each other when that occurred. There's just so much about that conversation. I suppose that one conversation could take an hour or more, because I can already see all the hands raising out there about the differences in these philosophies and why they are so different. But just remember, any philosophy that subverts the individual is a problem. Any philosophy that doesn't embrace liberty as the ultimate goal for every person and the protection of every person and the dignity of every person is a problem. And so if there's a question of too much liberty or too little, we should always be choosing too much and stop trying to control the other side as much as we can. Now, that doesn't mean we roll over. It means we have responsibilities. It doesn't mean we stop fighting. It means we fight intelligently. And you might remember the first episode we had was about intelligent resistance, which is what we're attempting to do here. It just so happens now the present environment has just gotten so caustic and so nasty. I never thought I would see the day where a conversation about politics could not be had unless someone was calling somebody else a name.
Oh, and it happens constantly. Of course, social media, as good of a tool as it can be for so many, it's so easy because nowadays, I can get right here behind a keyboard and I can type something mean to you, and we never have to come face to face. The old-fashioned ways of, back in the day, some of these political fights, some of these comments you see on social media would have resulted in somebody getting punched in the face. And I think that we've lost something with losing that.
Look, nobody naturally would ever advocate violence. But yeah, I mean, you look back as children, you learn valuable lessons on the playground.
Yeah, you do.
And politeness is one of those, because if you're impolite, you may get punched in the nose.
Exactly.
And now, no one is suggesting that's the way to handle the world's problems. But there is something to be said about a face-to-face confrontation.
Yes.
As opposed to sitting 100,000, as opposed to sitting 100 miles from one another, typing nasty things on social media. Maybe the face-to-face thing would humanize us more. I don't know. Maybe, I'm not, again, let me just say for the record, I'm not wanting Jack to punch anybody. I would very much like to punch you from time to time. But that's a whole different issue altogether. It's a whole different issue altogether. Now, let's real quick. There are so many things I want to cover, and I'm afraid if I get into this next one, it's going to be
Can I ask a question before we move?
It depends.
It's on this topic. The question is, again, when you're dealing with human nature and you're dealing with good people, because again, as I said before, I'm talking about really good people, but they're acting out of fear. how do we convince them that they're acting out of fear, and we try to get them to step back from just letting that fear drive them down the wrong path?
I don't know. It's a good question because we've all been guilty of it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'll be the first to tell you that every so often I will see MSNBC.
Yeah.
Or CNN. And I watch it purposefully because I do want to understand as best I can the other side's position.
I do the same.
But occasionally the positions are so caustic and nasty. And I get a little upset. I take, for example, if I were to come out and argue from an equal protection standpoint why it is that affirmative action is unconstitutional, I wouldn't have to have any bias or prejudice at all, but they would call me a what?
They call you a racist.
Well, that seems to be the term of the day. Everything they disagree with is a racist. If I were to argue, which I think is accurate. By the way, before we get into this, did you see that transgender male athlete in that track event versus those females?
I missed that one.
I think he ran the 200 meter and won by like 7 or 8, 10 seconds. It was a one-sided thing. So if I were to argue that he had no business competing against females, what would they call me?
They'd call you a bigot. They would say that you're a transphobe. That's the term I think.
So remember, the American left, and look, they're not all this way. They're not all this way. But there's a disproportionate number that really get incredibly offensive whenever there's any disagreement. And I think it does drive the conversation away from reason. Because the first thing I want to do is to yell back, right? But we shouldn't do that if we can help it. There are other ways to win this fight, and I think that's what we should be trying to do. It's just tough.
Yeah.
Like I said, I've been guilty of it too. And if you don't believe it, go to my Facebook page and see. I've said some pretty costly things over there.
No, you've never. Nothing's ever made a headline that you've said, right? Nothing.
Look, and I also want to be clear. I am a conservative. I'm gonna live and die a conservative. I've been giving these same speeches for more than 25 years, and I do believe that liberalism, as currently configured, is a threat. I do believe it's a threat.
You're accurate because it is
and,
a threat.
Because I think it ultimately threatens my individual liberty and yours as well, under the pretense of collectivism.
Yes.
And I think it's incredibly dangerous. Now, with that said, something that's not incredibly dangerous, in fact, it's incredibly comfortable, is the MyPillow that we've been given.
Oh, my goodness.
And now's our time for you to make clear why it's such a wonderful investment for conservatives.
Chris, you've been enjoying yours, right? Did you get to reclaim it from your kid?
Yes.
So you're back to sleeping on the MyPillow. Look, it's comfortable, you know. I mean, it really is one of the nicest pillows I've had. My sleep has been so much better on it. And the fact of the matter that you can go to mypillow.com/midnightride and you can get up to 80% off, not just on MyPillow, but on the comforters, the slippers, even coffee, Chris. I didn't even know they had coffee, you know. Which, Mike Lindell, if you're listening, we still want to sample that coffee. Send us some coffee.
Well, I mean, maybe his business model's messed up there. Who drinks coffee and goes to sleep?
That's a great point.
Seems counterintuitive. Maybe he should sell Tylenol PMs or something.
Well, look, you can just go to mypillow.com/midnightride for that 80% off, or just go to mypillow.com and enter the promo code midnightride, and you can get up to 80% off on select items.
We're incredibly grateful for that sponsorship, and it is a wonderful pillow. So I would encourage anybody out there that would like a new pillow to go by and check it out, or coffee. Mike Lindell, thank you very much for your sponsorship.
And the feels conform. So, I mean, that's the great part.
And now we're going to get to something that nobody's ever argued about, and that's abortion.
No, that's a safe topic. There'll be no arguments here.
And I talked about this the last show, and I handled it from a legal standpoint.
Yeah,
because I think that's the proper way to handle it. But I've noticed that there's been a lot of moves to the left by some Republican politicians based on something Trump said, and I think that's an unusual excuse they're using to justify their move to the left, because what Trump said, I believe, was accurate.
Yes.
We talked about that. He said the decision of abortion should come down to the states. I think that's the constitutional position. That's sound. He said that. And now all of a sudden you see Republicans running from the fight. Well, they shouldn't be running from the fight. They should be explaining why it is that it does belong in the states. And this all started with a decision that took place in Arizona. Now, I realize that nobody wants to read judicial opinions. I've been practicing law a long time. I don't even like judicial opinions.
And I'll be honest with you, Chris, I saw that come through, and the first thing I thought of was, I'm going to have to ask Chris questions about this.
Well, here's the thing. All of this outrage, the American left was apocalyptic over this decision.
Yes, they were.
And then you go actually read the decision, and you're like, what are you so mad about? Hold on, before you say anything, I want to address this legally, because I get the political points they're trying to score, which I think is silly. But why not score them intellectually and discuss the decision soundly the way it was actually worded, as opposed to what you think it said? I'm beginning to wonder if American leftists even have read the Constitution or understand how the Supreme Court, or any court for that matter, is supposed to work. They're not there to make the laws. They're there to interpret the laws that have already been made.
100% accurate.
Now, here's what happened. So in 1864, and by the way, this is going to take a few minutes, so bear with me. I'm not trying to bore the audience, but in 1864, there was a statute enacted, codified in Arizona. In fact, a bunch of their statutes were codified in 1864. And there's a reason for that. We'll get to that in a minute. But it was codified, and in that statute, it made abortion criminal, made it illegal. And it's a tough statute, which leads to the argument, to the point I was making, that when the 14th Amendment was adopted a couple of years later, there wasn't a fundamental right to abortion in this country, because almost every state had adopted similar statutes as Arizona. So
Yes.
that's strike one, liberalism. You've just missed that. But here's what happened. They passed the law in 1864. Well, lo and behold, 1973 comes along, right? Roe versus Wade comes along. In Roe, they established abortion as a constitutional or fundamental right. When that happened, the 1864 law was challenged. When that old law was challenged, it was enjoined by a court. What that means is the court says, you're right. The Supreme Court spoken on this issue. You can't use the 1864 law to enforce a criminal action. Okay, makes sense, right?
Yeah.
1864, they pass it. Black and white law. 73, it's reversed by judicial decision. The court is enjoined the statute, so it can't be enforced. But then later, Arizona recodifies it. Even though it was technically unenforceable, they recodify it later. Now, what you have here is a statute that's still in the books. Black and white. Words matter in law. Words matter in law.
Yeah.
So the Dobbs decision comes along, and it basically says that Roe was wrongfully decided, that abortion is not a fundamental right.
Yep.
Which liberals, I hope you understand this, which now placed that 1864 law back into play.
It did.
Okay? It's black and white. The court didn't write the law. The court didn't draft it. The court didn't put a rubber stamp on it. The court said our job is to interpret. It's there in black and white. So the liberal lawyers got clever, and they said, well, there were other laws passed that could have altered the law. But they didn't. And so what the court did, it went through a series of statutory analysis. Read it. Don't believe CNN. Don't believe MSNBC and all this rhetoric. Read the decision. It applied basic statutory analysis and came out with the only reasoned conclusion it could have come up with. And that is, guess what? Now it's back to good law. Now listen to these words and you tell me how problematic this is, because remember, the liberals made this sound like it was the end of the world. The liberals made it sound like this court drafted this out of thin air, remember?
Mm-hmm. They did.
I'm going to put my trusty flashlight on so my blind self can see this text.
Do you need my glasses?
I wouldn't dare. I'm fighting that with everything in my power.
No.
But I want you to hear the text here, and even if you're leftist, tell me where you found this objectionable. The court finished. It said the abortion issue implicates morality and public policy concerns. Okay, we agree. It inspires spirited debate. We should all agree. It engenders passionate disagreement. That's all accurate. Okay? It says a policy matter of this gravity must be resolved by our citizens through the legislature or the initiative process. What were they supposed to find? That's exactly the correct ruling. It's saying our hands are tied. We're not the legislature. It's in black and white. We know this is important. We know to the American left this really stinks, but this is the right decision. Listen to what it then says. We respect the role of the legislature in the discharge of its constitutional duties, and we heed our fundamental premise that the division of powers impels restraint, particularly in the realm of lawmaking. What more could you ask for? This wasn't an apocalyptic decision. They were doing what they had to do under the law. Now the people of Arizona can decide how they want to proceed. Why is that the end of the world? They can do an initiative process and change it, or they can elect representatives to change it. This is the American system. But CNN made it sound like it was the end of the world.
And I think that's where the questions I wanted to ask you come from, is the fact that there's so much misinformation. They're making it sound like this Supreme Court of Arizona went up there and just pulled an old law and brought it back because they felt like they should bring it back. That's not what they did.
That's exactly how they framed the entire story, and it's absolutely a lie. It's absolutely disingenuous. This court was constrained by the legislature, and the last sentence here in the conclusion makes it perfectly clear. This is what the court said. We defer, as we are constitutionally obligated to do, to the legislature's judgment.
Yeah.
How can anybody disagree with that? You may dislike it, but your job now, if you dislike it, is to change the law, not use the courts to rewrite the law.
It's so frustrating, Chris, because again, and I know this is a little off topic from where we're going, but I just get so tired of the mainstream media and not reporting the facts. Because again, as somebody who went to school for journalism, studied journalism, was told that we're never supposed to be the story. We're supposed to be objective, no matter what our opinion is. That's not what they practice at all today. This story just highlights that, and it plays back into that fear, that human nature that you've been talking about from day one, because they're placating to that fear.
Now the show's clicking. That was the point of the story. Human nature.
Yep.
Human nature. People take it, they're afraid of it, they twist the facts to suit their opinion, and then they lie about it. CNN, MSNBC, you lied about it. The story here is this. There was a law passed in 1864. It's still on the books. And when Dobbs reversed Roe, it became law again. Have a nice evening. Because that's what happened.
Go to your state legislature and you'll figure it out from there if you don't like it.
If you want to change it, change it.
Yeah.
But don't claim it's some conservative conspiracy to set people back to the 1860s. That's not what occurred here.
It's so absurd. I mean, it frustrates me because, again, the people that don't have good people that don't have time to do the research that we do, they're the ones that fall prey to the lies from the media. And this is why they have a responsibility to be better.
Well, remember, when people are afraid, this is when people take advantage of them. And the media, whatever happened to an honest media? And that's on both sides now.
I agree.
It's on both sides. I never thought I would see the day that I would flip a news channel just from, now, listen, I can be unbiased here.
Yeah.
Fox has an agenda.
Yes, they do.
Okay. CNN has an agenda. And somewhere in there's the truth. Somewhere in there is the truth. But when I flip back and forth, and it's the exact same story they're covering, and it's night and day.
Yep. Chris.
Night and day. Now, speaking of that, and let's transition real quick, because there was another story about that today. National Public Radio.
Got this one in front of me.
Now look, man, I've always listened to NPR as well because it's very soothing. I remember Saturday Night Live had a skit a few years ago. Remember that? Nobody remembers it, but
I think I remember the one you're talking about.
And it kind of mocked NPR just a bit, but I've never minded it because I remember there's supposed to be this open-minded, discussion-based, taxpayer-funded channel, which, by the way, I have a problem with. I don't think the taxpayer should be funding that kind of stuff.
No, they shouldn't be.
But they do, and NPR's been there for an awfully long time, and it's always had this liberal leaning, and we've always known it. I still listen because, again, I try to understand as best I can what's going on over there. And finally, someone there speaks out.
Yeah.
Did you see it?
I did. Yuri Berliner. Is that how you say his name?
Where do you see that? I had another name.
I'm old Fox. I'm old Fox.com. Says
no. Listen, it was Berliner. He got a 5-day suspension without pay, and then later somebody reported he had been terminated. Now, whatever it is, this guy's worked there for almost 25 years.
Yeah,
and he finally just came out and said, "Look, we're out of control. Everything's biased. Everything's neutralized. We can't find anybody just to report the news." And again, instead of confronting him or debating him, which I thought NPR was all things considered, right?
That's what they claim.
Why not bring him on a show and discuss it? Because the taxpayers are paying for it. Maybe we could hear both sides of the equation. But instead, they just basically throw him out of the building. Yeah. And that was designed, of course, to punish him for having an alternative viewpoint, which, again, is the whole point of a national public radio, I would think, unless you're China unless you're Russia, state-sponsored media, right?
Yeah.
But here, this sounds a lot like state-sponsored
It
media.
really does.
And here we are, we're supposed to be looking at varying viewpoints, and even their internal editor, which has a significant opinion here, is thrown out for sharing a different viewpoint.
Yeah.
I thought diversity is what liberals wanted. What a strange word for those people. They really don't want diversity. They want uniformity under the guise of diversity.
Yep.
But the second somebody has an alternative idea, they're going to be punished. And here we are watching this punishment. But who can really discuss? I mean, even liberals out there, let's not kid ourselves. Who out there among us, left or right, would consider NPR a conservative outlet?
Nobody.
Nobody. They know it. We know it. Why not just confront it? Why not fix it?
You know,
Why not defund it?
I think defunding is a first step, and
here's why. Can I say that real quick?
Go ahead.
I want you to hear this for a second. Bear in mind that growing up, when I was a little boy,
Mm-hmm.
I remember, I think there were 3 channels.
I do. I remember that.
What a ridiculous, backwards, prehistoric time that was. There was no internet. There was no Wi-Fi. We had 3 channels. It gets worse. We had to get up and actually turn the channel with our fingers.
You were your parents' remote back in the
I remember the first remote control I found, and it was literally a miracle in a box.
It was. It was amazing.
I kept flipping back and forth between the 3 channels all day.
You mean, Dad, I don't have to get up and go change the channel for you anymore?
The point is that you had 3 channels at the time. And so the theory being is that you wanted a channel out there that could, A, be used as an emergency broadcast channel if needed. B, would be an educational type channel because there was a lack of real educational TV. Back in the day when TV was first created, believe it or not, we were told it was going to revolutionize education.
I remember every new technology is going to revolutionize.
Wait, but hold on. Right here, we were told that TV was going to revolutionize education. And for a moment there, it appeared that it could. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, we devolved into all the mindless stuff that we watch today. Again, nothing wrong with that. Entertainment has its place in society, but it's not really an educational tool. But at the time, we thought the National Public Radio and even the state-sponsored PBSs would be there, if you will, to educate people, right? It really hasn't happened in the sense that we thought because we're not seeing both sides of the equation.
No.
So when it occurred with 3 channels, I guess somebody made the argument that government had a role here. It's going to be a positive role for the citizenry.
Mm-hmm.
Let's fund it, see what happens. How many channels are there now?
Goodness. I mean, over 300 or more.
And there are a lot of educational channels. If you
Allegedly.
Look. Well, I know there are because I have a kid. And there are some channels out there you can go to and watch. Even Nickelodeon from time to time has decent educational style stuff, right? You see them out there. With 500 plus channels, you can find a National Geographic. You can find something educational for your children. The point is the free market has worked wonderfully in bringing a bunch of new channels, a bunch of new options. Why do we still need state-sponsored TV?
We don't.
We don't. Yet millions, if not ultimately now, I guess the number would be probably more than 1 billion. I don't mean yearly. I mean cumulatively. Over these years, we have funded all these state TV institutions and the national institutions through PBS and otherwise. I'm just not sure that's needed under the present configuration.
I got a question here because, you're talking about PBS. It's a known brand, probably most popular for the children's show Sesame Street, which isn't Sesame Street its own brand? Isn't Sesame Street making a ton of money off of what? So tell me, why does PBS need my tax dollars, your tax dollars, when they've got a global recognized brand in Sesame Street?
No, we can answer that. I can answer that, seriously, because 90% of their stuff can't sell. Mm-hmm. That's the brilliance of the marketplace. Mm-hmm. They wouldn't need subsidies if their programming was worth a darn.
That's fair.
Okay, so Sesame Street is one of those that's worth a darn. But the rest of this stuff is quite frightening. It's quite frightening. Even Sesame Street to some of us was quite frightening. Let's not kid ourselves. I mean, where is this, on a back street in Brooklyn? What's going on up there?
There were some questions.
Yeah, there was. Sure. But the thing is that if you have a channel that sells something that people demand, they're going to find a way to make a profit eventually. But it just so happens a lot of those shows there's no demand for. And I guess the response is, well, the people need it. They need to see it either way. Well, let's think about it. But if they do, why is it so darn one-sided? If we need to see it, give us both sides of the story, which is not what we're getting.
Yeah.
So remember, there is some degree of success. No, there's a large degree of success in marketplace economics. It's called capitalism. Allowing programs to achieve success based on their merit is better than state-sponsored nonsense, because what we have here is subpar programming nobody wants to see.
Yep.
And so they leave the channel, which requires more subsidies to maintain it over the years. And that's what we've seen with public television and NPR. So look, if you're going to have a state-sponsored show, why not give us both sides of the equation? And this poor guy raises one opinion, and he's jettisoned. Speaking of opinions, did you guys see, I don't know if there was these Democrats celebrating this Iranian attack. Did you see that story today?
I did.
You got to help me out, Democrats.
It's crazy.
I'm a little confused here. It would seem to me that if you're talking about the liberation of an oppressed people, I can't think of anybody more oppressed than the people of Israel. This literally surrounded by enemies that seek their annihilation. Iran has been very clear about that since 1979. Does anybody remember the revolution there in 1979? I barely do, but I've read about it. I know for a fact that one of their first goals was what? The obliteration of Israel.
Yes.
And it's been a shared goal since 1979. And since 79, they've used proxies to conduct their so-called warfare. You know, Hezbollah, Hamas, these small radicalized groups that happen to be around Israel's border and kind of hide in the Palestinian population and then attack willy-nilly whenever they see an opportunity. This was the first time since 79 that Iran took it upon themselves to launch more than 300 projectiles directly toward Israel. That's a big deal. That's a big step. You once would have described this almost like a Cold War. Well, this war is not cold anymore. It's red hot.
No.
And there are some real questions we should ask ourselves about this. Why it is that liberals would actively celebrate an attack on a democracy in the Middle East, one of the few there, by the way, that still upholds human values for the most part and respects diversity and religious differences, unlike their counterparts in Iran. Why the liberals, who profess to be people who are proponents of liberalism, would be so hard on Israel, calling them occupiers. This is the darndest argument I've ever seen. Where does it end? Do they just wake up in the morning looking for something to bitch about and then ignore 2,000 years of human existence to get there? I think it seems they're doing that. Here's what I do know unequivocally. You have a small country there that has every right to exist and has since 1948, officially since 1948. The Balfour Declaration and the UN, backed by almost every country in this world, wanted that place for the Jewish people so they could be protected, or at least hope so. They had been persecuted for years, haven't they? A madman tried to eliminate them from the face of the planet. That's one thing I don't understand about these people who are anti-Jewish or anti-Israeli. What have they done to you? I mean, these liberal, I mean, these theories out there that somehow they're out to get you, these bankers and all this. I don't see any evidence of that. All I see is people that have been persecuted their entire existence and they need a break. Giving them Israel was the break that they needed to preserve themselves and their integrity. Thank God for it, right?
Amen.
Now, they're attacked by a country that seeks their obliteration. That's an oppressor.
Yes.
That's the oppressor. And yet they're celebrated for attacking Israel. Now, here's one of the questions I do have now. And this is going to get complicated, and I hope somebody out there can answer it for me. You have roughly 300 projectiles shot into Israel, and they gave the Western world a 72-hour heads up. What is going on in Iran? Now, this is something that we need to really think about it, because I think it implicates a lot of big decisions that have to be made in the coming days, because we really are on the edge of a significant war in the Middle East that could be a world war if we're not careful. So Iran gives Western powers 72 hours advance notice, and then they launch 300 projectiles that they know are probably going to be intercepted.
Yes.
And 99+% of them were intercepted. And now Iran is saying, look, we're done. We're done. We're done. We don't want to escalate this. Russia is saying not to escalate it. The American government, for the most part, is saying not to escalate it. Britain, Germany, France, all don't escalate it. Israel seems inclined to escalate. Now, should they? Maybe. I think I would want to escalate if I were Israel. But if they do, was this somehow perhaps a setup? I mean, we've got now Iran playing the victim card.
Yeah.
We've got Americans cheering for Iran in Dearborn, Michigan, right? Saying death to America.
I saw that.
My concern is if Israel's not very careful on how they allow this to play out, they could be stepping in some sort of foreign policy trap. Am I just being paranoid here, or is there something else in play? Here's something else. Their proxies, who are more close to the border than Iran, failed to participate significantly in this attack. And 300 projectiles isn't a lot for Iran. What was their end goal here?
Their end goal, I think you're on to something, Chris, because, I mean, to your point, they had to have known they were going to be intercepted. They had to see this was going to be the end result. So the only other thing, and the fact that they're not wanting to escalate it further, I think that they're hoping to garner the sympathy. I think they're also hoping to make Israel have to eat it and stand down and make Israel look bad.
That's just it, though. Israel's got a victory here. How are they going to look bad? I mean, you shot 300 missiles and drones at me, and we knocked them all down. What are you going to do? That's called a victory.
I think so.
Now, I'm not suggesting Israel should stand down necessarily. I'm just saying that they better, and I'm sure they are, a disproportionate response, which, heck, maybe they should, but they should just understand a disproportionate response in this modern age where everybody is so sensitive might invite world backlash.
And I think that's what they're going for.
Well, look, Israel has every right to defend itself, and I think Joe Biden, the mistake he's made is he needs to quit interfering so much. If he wants to communicate a message in back channels to Netanyahu and express his concern about escalation, do so. But I don't think he should be playing politics with it in the American public. We have to, in my mind, stand with Israel. That doesn't mean troops. But it does mean defend our only ally, our only natural real ally that's a functioning democracy in that part of the world. There are a lot of reasons for that, economically and otherwise. But I'm not suggesting troops, not by any stretch of the imagination. I am suggesting that we need to let Israel be Israel, and at the same time, we pray that they have the discernment not to escalate this so actively and so aggressively that it causes the entire world to turn against them. Because if they're all by themselves, and Biden, because of political pressure in this campaign, were to remove that carrier and to remove those American planes, what happens?
Israel falls.
Potentially, I suppose. Nobody wants to see that.
No.
Even you liberals, you shouldn't want that.
No, they probably do, but, they shouldn't want it. I mean, Chris, I want to ask this question before you move on to the next thing. How much, too, do you think seeing Iran and other entities in the Middle East, having the guts to perform something like this, how much of that do you think is happening because they view Joe Biden and his administration as weak, and they feel like they can get away with whatever now?
Well, weakness has always invited aggression. Mm-hmm. No question about that. And that's one of the reasons that we do spend so much on the military, that we have learned over the years, that particularly with the Eastern Europeans, the Soviets especially, that weakness around the world does invite aggression. And the key for Biden is he is senile, bless his heart.
Yeah.
And we all know that. Democrats, I'm not saying that as an arch Republican. Even the Democrats, when you look at poll numbers, they'll tell you they think he's senile, they think he's too old to be president.
When they're honest, yes.
They've been very honest in the poll numbers. They really have. They've said that. No, they'll still vote for it.
Oh, yeah.
But we have a guy here that really doesn't have the mental capacity to be president. I guess folks around it think they can control that and make it work. Don't think for a minute that the foreign powers, particularly Putin, understands this. And don't think for a second that Iran understands this. Ask yourself this. Would Iran have shot 300 projectiles at Israel if Ronald Reagan were president?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. It would have been devastating. And same can be said for Trump. I think Trump probably would have responded in a similar, very aggressive fashion, or at least in a fashion they could not predict. Remember, unpredictability sometimes can create delay. And in Iran, naturally, with a superpower like us, they have to be concerned about unpredictability. I think with Biden, it was pretty predictable that he has to placate the base of his party. He's got the convention coming up. He's trying to make these people happy, these wackadoos on the left, right?
Yeah.
And so they knew that he was going to be passive.
Yeah.
He may shoot some projectiles down, but he's not going to participate any further. I think they know that, and I think that's why they did what they did. I just hope there's not an over-escalation to where there's going to be the world turn their back on Israel, because I support Israel. Yep. That's going to make even some conservatives going to be mad when I say that. But I want to be clear. We don't have time to watch our basically our only real ally in the Middle East fall because you're worried about some conspiracy out there. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's.
But again, I'm not suggesting American troops. I would never suggest that. I think Israel can fend for itself in that regard. Now, with that said, we've already gone most of the day, and I've already said enough objectionable things. Is there anything else we missed over the last few days that perhaps we should cover in the final couple of minutes?
You know, hey, Chris, there was one, and I'm trying to find it, a story that I wanted to ask you a question about. And I'm sure you hadn't seen this column because it's a Los Angeles Times column, Chris. And the title of the column, and this is one of those things that goes back to the tribalism, are Republicans who got pandemic relief hypocrites for complaining about student debt relief? And then they answer the question in the headline, yes. So again, it's a very leading piece that is, again, arguing that those who have called out student debt.
Here, the distinction here, I think, is that the pandemic, that is the shutdown of the economy, was caused by overzealous politicians.
It was.
And it was the shutdown of the economy that created these so-called damages that rose as the result. Now, as a lawyer, we look at that as cause and effect. If the government's going to take an action that shuts down my business and I lose a couple $100,000, doesn't the government owe me a couple $100,000 for that?
They're the ones who put you in that disarray. It's not because you made a choice to take out a loan.
That's the distinction here. And yet, student loans, I realize, are problematic from a financial interest sometimes, and I realize that kids make really stupid mistakes, but there's also something to be said for contractual obligations and relationships. And there's something to be said also for the fact that now the taxpayers, that is, people that have already paid back their loans, are not having to assume and pay back the loans of others. That doesn't seem very fair to me. But again, this is an election year.
Yeah.
And Biden's forgiving this debt for a very important reason. He realizes it's going to engender some support, and he's going to get folks come out to vote.
Buying votes.
So this is the oldest thing known to man, right? And the Democrats are remarkable at buying votes, and they've done it for a long time. Hence our $34 trillion debt with no end in sight. And unfortunately, a lot of folks are going to fall for that. Now, here's the thing. We'll save the rest of the debate for the student loan debacle at another time because we are toward the end of this program. And we did not do Chris McDaniel's Rhino Hunter today. However, we do have a special surprise coming up next week. Jack, I think if you've got it near, this is the time to debut to let the people see what you've done.
Should I put it on?
Of course, put it on. What's the point of having the mask if you're not going to put it on?
I don't know if you can hear me with this thing on, and I have trouble seeing you.
The camera needs to pick that up, and I'm assuming that's going to happen at some point because. Jack, you look wonderful.
I'm pretty sure I'm on camera, and I guarantee you there are people that think this is an improvement. So there you have it.
Yeah, it's pretty devastating. Like I said, this will probably be the last show.
Or this is the show that blows up and we become a bigger success.
No, that's probably not going to happen. Don't get your hopes up. Anyway, this has been Chris McDaniel's America. Jack, I enjoyed it as always.
Thanks, Chris.
And I look forward to next time with you.
Looks like you've been sleeping well.
Megan, he's back. The My Pillow guy.
And you're looking good.
Still feeling good.
Well, just when you thought it couldn't get any better, we've got the best pillow ever, My Pillow 2.0.
Wow, it's so soft and smooth.
It's cool to the touch. How did you do that?
Well, we took My Pillow's patented fill and combined it with this new technology that we didn't have back then when I invented My Pillow, to bring you the best pillow in history, My Pillow 2.0. Just like all of you, I never imagined that My Pillow could get any better. That's why I haven't changed it in nearly 20 years. Then I heard about a revolutionary new technology, and I knew I had to bring it to you all. My Pillow 2.0 is truly the next generation of My Pillow.
The My Pillow 2.0 is cooler and softer than the last My Pillow. It is so comfortable to sleep on at night. I look forward to going to bed, and I wake up well rested in the morning.
Sleep is all about temperature and height. My Pillow 2.0's patented adjustable fill is going to give you the exact individual support you need from your head to your bed. And now here's where it gets even better. We've all experienced those temperature-related sleep interruptions where you get too hot, you toss and turn, you flip your pillow over to the cool side. Well, all that's gone with my brand new MyPillow 2.0 cooling fabric that's made with temperature regulating thread.
The best sleep just got even better. Whether you have a MyPillow or not, you need to get the brand new MyPillow 2.0. Call or go to MyPillow.com now. Use your promo code, and for a limited time when you buy one, you'll get a second one absolutely free.
You're sleeping even better.
And cooler, too.
And you're looking good.
Feeling good.
I knew you would.
Visit MyPillow.com.